time for fun, learning, commentary, laughs, and more care of the most diverse group in the genealogy and family history world. Welcome to BlackProGen Live with your hosts, Nika and True, and the baddest panel in these pedigree streets: Angela, James, Linda, Alex, Ellen, Tony, Shelly, Teresa, Bernice, Felicia, Willie, Renata, and Tasia. It's BlackProGen Live, genealogy, family history research with flavor.
Good evening and hello and welcome to BlackProGen Live. It is Tuesday and we are so excited about our new episode, Use a Lie. So we just want to welcome you all from wherever you're coming in from. And now I'm going to turn my mic over to your host and our girl, Nika Smith.
What's going on, True Lewis?
Hey, it's been busy.
Yes, I was going to say it has been a week.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it was nice and sunny wherever you all were at. It was 81 degrees in Memphis today. I actually busted my shorts out in my flip flops. I went full California on the folks in West Tennessee today. I sure did. But that's all right because the weather is getting better. That means it's going to be humid in about 3 or 4 weeks. I'm not looking forward to that. But what I am looking forward to is tonight's episode. Many begin their family history journey believing there aren't many records available for African American families or that there is no history to record. We know that's not true at all. In tonight's episode, we'll discuss common myths about African American family history, how to respond to them when they arise in your own family, and ways to share the findings you've made to change the narrative. Thanks so much for joining us for Use a Lie, busting down myths about African American family history. Have a question or comment? Join the conversation now. Participate in the live chat on YouTube to the top right hand of the screen if you're watching on a computer, and at the bottom of the YouTube app on your mobile device. Also, feel free to weigh in on Twitter by tweeting us at BlackProGen or use the hashtag BlackProGen. And if you've ever wanted to watch an episode live and you somehow missed the reminder, here is your reminder to go ahead and set reminders. All you need to do is head to the YouTube channel and click set reminder under the episode you're interested in. And also be sure to hit the little bell so that you'll get an email notification. Now, here's the thing. If you're using Gmail, those notifications are going to go to your promotions or your social tab. So, even though you did set the little bell and you set the subscribe, be sure to check that promotions area or that social area. It's actually the social area because that's where your email notification is going to come in. And we've got episodes loaded pretty much throughout the rest of the year. So set reminder next to those that you're interested in, and you'll get notified whenever we go live as well. Also, here is your opportunity to purchase your BlackProGen Life merch. I presented in Nashville last week, and several people that were there were viewers, which was great. We love to see viewers in person. And several of them said that they were purchasing bags and whatever other accoutrements that they felt like purchasing. So here is your reminder to purchase your BlackProGen Live merch. This will actually be seen this week in Salt Lake City. Several of us are traveling there for a little mini research trip. So get your BPG Live merch care of Ken Custom today. For those researching people of color, were your ancestors enslaved or were they free? Do you have a story in the family of a mixed heritage with Native Americans? Could you possibly have ancestors who were in the Civil War, or did some become contrabands? Are you considering writing your family's history? If any of these questions pertain to you and the genealogy work that you conduct, then Maggie, the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute, may unlock more doors. This institute is unique as it offers 7 tracks over 3 days. It's a total of 84 classes, all pertaining to African American genealogy genealogy. Maggie unfolds at the world-renowned Genealogy Center at the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana from July 9th through the 11th, 2019. Classes are small, intense, and focused. The tracks offer sessions on in-depth slavery research, unique record sets, beginning and advanced DNA classes, methods of researching pre- and post-slavery era documents from military to migration, and more. And for the first time, Maggie offers a writing lab and an intensive dive into the records of the 5 civilized tribes of Oklahoma. Join us at Maggie, the Teaching Institute. Make the best investment in your family's future and past. Choose Maggie. And guess what? For those of you who need to conserve your coins, there are 4 scholarships available to take care of your registration for Maggie. So be sure to visit the website, go to the register tab, and you'll see the area for the 4 different scholarships. All right, it's time to come off video and audio mute. Panel joining us from the beautiful state of Maryland. We have my soror, Bernice Alexander Bennett. Also joining us from the beautiful state of Maryland is our resident Y chromosome, James Morgan III. You know what? I'm just remembering the last episode that he was on. We went in circles about his middle name, and people really thought the middle name we gave him was the right one. And I just have to clear the record that it was not the right middle name.
No, it was not.
So just in case y'all thought that's not the right middle name. I guess we'll just make that a pet name for you.
As long as you put a David in front of it.
going forward, we've also got Linda Buck Sims checking in from the Show Me State of Missouri, and our girl co-host True Lewis checking in from Fort Knox, Kentucky. Chat room is flying tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us. Hello, Katrina. Hello, Cecilia Matoya Charles. Gary Franklin from Toledo, from Maggie is in the house. Andrea Adams, Mosey Ruffin. Hello, this is like Romper Room, isn't it? Denise Muhammad. Hey, girl, how are you? Dale E. Colston. Hello from Jersey. Hello from Tennessee. My cousin Raymond Reeves. Hello, what's going on? Got a full house. We are so glad you all are here to join us on this Tuesday night. So let's talk about myths, right? There's a lot going on. And you know what? I don't think it's a coincidence that today is the day that it is. Today is the anniversary of the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. Right? And that is very significant because, of course, what you get from that whole historic event, right? The South surrendering to the North, is the lost cause, right? The whole idea that the Civil War was not about slavery at all. It was about states' rights, right? And so this is a myth that has been perpetuated not just in the Southern United States. I mean, you know, if you really want to talk real, myths have been perpetuated through textbooks in our school system for years. Texas and California drive what's in textbooks because they are the largest purchasers of textbooks. So whatever Texas and California say happened, well, that's what happens. That's what people learn nationally. And so there have been a lot of things perpetuated. In fact, I think one of the favorite things that I've seen over the last 24 hours is this whole concept that everybody has had equal opportunities to do things. And it's just your fault that you don't have, you know, this is not a race thing. Very funny. Haha, very funny. So we won't even get into that too much, but we're here to talk about some of the major myths that are perpetuated in African American genealogy, family history, just the topic in general. So the first myth that I have for us to address is probably, I would say, the most pervasive one. Every person of African descent was a slave.
False.
Yep.
Why is it false?
Well, very simply put, we can document not only that you had free people who were either freed legally, born free, or who self-emancipated themselves. You know, you may have a small group of people who came to the Americas during, you know, the early years of their own free will. Very small number, but I think one of the reasons why it's perpetuated is because people are often put into these little boxes of saying, well, you're black, so slave. That's the stamp. That's the stamp that gets put there. Or if you're of this particular racial group, or you're this gender, or whatever, it puts people in these nice little boxes. But history is not set up that way. There's a lot of fluid motion that goes on, and people's status changes over time as well, which I think you also have to consider when you're doing family research or any type of historical research.
Linda?
Ditto to what James was saying. That's what I was about to say.
Bernice, anything to add to that?
No, ditto. I mean, he's absolutely right. You have, and it's very fluid. You do find that there were, of course, free people of color, as well as individuals that were enslaved. And it's not an absolute all African Americans were enslaved, because that is just not the case.
Yes, and the statistics tell us that 10% of the population of African American people or people of African descent living in the United States before the Civil War were free. So, just as African American people are 10% of the population roughly now, right? Just imagine if everybody that was black was free right now, which we are. But it's that's the basic metric. True, anything to add to the conversation?
No, I think you're right. I mean, it's documented, so we know that that's not true. We've known that from our own family history, our oral history. So we can go back and find that out. I don't know. It always stumps me when I hear that.
Why do you all think that myth was perpetuated? You think it's popular culture? Do you think it's because that's all people hear about in movies? Or why do you think the myth of every person of African descent was enslaved? Why do you think that is still perpetuated even
Well,
today?
there's a reality that you do hear more about enslaved people than you hear of free people. And you're right, it is perpetuated in movies and books and what have you. Even some of the genealogical shows, they will take a person to look for an enslaved ancestor before they look for somebody who was free.
And
Mm-hmm.
people rather believe what they hear instead of reading and looking for themselves. And so they'll turn on the TV, they'll look at a book, they'll listen to what someone tell them before they research it and look for it themselves.
And I think too, it was just for me personally, it was just based off of my education.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I learned it in my home, or read it, but in school, no, not even in elementary, middle school. And it just, I remember always arguing and fighting over that when we would just get that little paragraph in February or in our history book period. It just was not taught to us in education. And I think that that's where it starts as well, is you need to go back to that. And that's why we keep advocating about keep telling the stories, when they're younger, because we just keep running into the same cycle, repeating and perpetuating all these stories that we've heard in the past. And it's somehow or another, I don't know why it's not getting through, but that's why BlackProGen Live is here.
Yeah, I think part of it is educational. I think maybe if you were raised in an environment where there
Mhm.
was a large free people of color population, where people were raised in, families that knew that they were free, I think there's more of a likelihood that would have been passed down, so that when you got to those particular units or sections in your classroom spaces,
Mhm.
those kids could then amplify their voices and say, well, not everybody was enslaved, my people were free. Or, you know what I mean? I think with the proliferation of family history research now, I think we'll actually start seeing that more kids being more, or young people being more empowered to share those narratives. But I think a lot of this does have to do with popular culture. Because if you look at the imagery of how Black people or people of color were portrayed, right, in the newspaper, through caricatures, all sorts of very downtrodden, very slave like, you know what I mean? And so if you show anyone in any other posture beyond that, that completely goes against what you've just sold. to people, or what you've been selling to people for the last century or more. So, so yeah, I think all the points you guys have made are very valid. So the next myth I have: Black folks don't have any records. So why are you bothering spending all that time looking for Black people? Because we aren't in any records.
That is most definitely a myth. And we have so many records, we could just name them all. And we've talked about those records on BlackProGen Live. That yes, we are in records and we are there, we're documented. Not only are we documented in the federal records, but you do have families that did keep documentation. They did find that their ancestors were in the newspaper, not just from the 1870s, but further back. So I think that when you start hearing this, you should say, wait a minute, I'm going to continue to look, because the ancestors, your ancestors, are documented in places. There are records.
Absolutely. I just happened to clean out the last box of information that my grandmother had. And in that box, I just thought it was an old radio, picked the box up, and out fell a whole ton of pictures and a letter that her brother sent to my great grandmother verifying his birth. And he was born before the birth records were mandatory. So we are documented.
True.
What was that again?
No, I was just we're talking about the myth of
Blacks don't have any records.
There's no records. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that people think this?
Well, first of all, we were accounted for as not being anything, so we have that overshadowing us over all these years. Oh well, slaves don't have this, or free people of color don't have that type of record. So that's the line where I'm going with it.
Mm-hmm. And I think
about
Shannon,
the myth.
and Shannon Christmas brings up a great point in the chat room: the myth that African Americans can't research their families. I think that's definitely as pervasive as there aren't any records. I think they kind of go hand in hand as to the reason why Black people can't research their families is because there are no records, right? It's like they go, right? It's like one lie has to feed the other lie, right? Because usually if you start one lie, you got to keep lying, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I really think that that's the reason why that's so pervasive. I had people, I tell the story all the time. I had people in my own family who thought, what was the point of me going to do on-site research? We weren't in any of those records. They didn't consider us important. But that's the thing. We generated money. So we were important enough to document, right? So that either that being as enslaved people or being, folks that were free. We had money associated with us, whether it was tax dollars because of money to be paid into taxes, right? Whether it was, oh, I want your land because it's got oil on it, so let me try to take it. That's money, right? It's all about money, right? Follow the water, follow the money.
Follow the white people.
Yeah. The land.
The land,
right?
absolutely.
The land. James,
follow that land.
James, would you like to join in to this myth, that there are no records?
Oh Lord, don't start me on that. Where to begin? The first thing to remember, it sounds like you were mentioning, is that our ancestors, in terms of those who were enslaved, were considered property. Those of us who were not enslaved, when you go pre-Civil War, I mean, they left records. They built churches. They, like you said, they owned property. They established fraternal and civic organizations. Newspapers were being published. All type of things are out there. What I find happens a lot of times when people say that, and I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's your first day researching history, or if you're a professor with a bunch of books behind you and movies and everything else. You've got lazy scholars out here who don't want to take the time to sit down. Yes, I said it. You've got lazy scholars out here who don't want to take the time to actually do their work to get to the truth of the matter that we're speaking about. Okay, so it's easier to say, hey, it's not there, there's nothing to look at, or what have you. than to actually sit down and go through some microfilm or go talk to some old man or old woman out in the backwoods somewhere, what have you, who has some old family Bible with some small little cursive script that you got to get a magnifying glass to read. You know, it's easy to just ignore all of that.
I think you do have a point though, because this is something I talk to a lot of people of color researchers about. We talked about it a lot on this show as well. Is this sort of hunger in all of us to go the extra mile times like a million, right? Because we're so used to being questioned.
Right.
And so naturally, like there's like this like serious need, like deep in our guts to legitimize what we found, and our spirits, right? The soul, the souls of our ancestors that come together, the many parts that make up who we are as a unique person, right? They are telling us we have the right information. The information is saying we have the right information, but even yet, and still, it's like. You know, the first thing I think of is when you're watching somebody run a relay race in track, right? Granted, I ain't never been a track runner, but one of the things I know is when you pass the baton, you don't just stop when you pass the baton.
Right.
You have to keep running, right? That is literally a visual euphemism for what most people of color researchers are doing.
Right.
Because we can't just stop, right? The baton has to keep going. Like that's just kind of the posture that we're in. And so the reason why I bring that up is when you are willing to go that extra mile and do that much extra, it feeds you in a different way, and and your research has a different perspective.
Absolutely.
And I think that some of the folks that you're referencing in terms of scholars, in terms of people being lazy, I think your point is correct. And I think one of the reasons why they perpetuate this myth is so that they can ensure their own coins and own payments and checks later in the future to make themselves seem more marketable and what's the word? Like they, you know what I mean? Kind of like the only one who can get to the info.
Absolutely. Well, the key word here is motivation. Okay. When earlier today I was watching a film talking about the Haitian Revolution, right? And if you really sit and look at it, the Haitian Revolution should not have been successful militarily. Okay, you've got a bunch of people who were enslaved. They've got machetes. They know the terrain. They had to fight a guerrilla war against one of the most powerful nations on the planet at that time. And to this day, people will talk about how great Napoleon Bonaparte was as a general, but won't talk about Jean-Jacques Dessalines. But what was the difference? See, Dessalines and Toussaint and all of them, their motivation was, hey, man, I didn't see my sister get sold away. I've seen my children be taken from me. That does something different to you from a military aspect, and from as a researcher or a historian, when you have a connection with the actual subjects in which you're studying, when that's your great-great-grandfather or grandmother on that piece of paper that's listed at being sold for $600, or even worse, somebody's trying to tell you that there is no record, as you just pointed out. What do you mean there's no record? I mean, I didn't just fall out the sky. And I mean, I know I'm handsome, but I didn't just fall out the sky. I had to come from somewhere, right? So that's just something that just for us to be thinking about. And just because somebody put it in a book or they've got books and stuff out doesn't mean that they're not lazy scholars, because you got them out here.
Well, I think we've got an example. We'll cover this during current events, but we definitely have a living example. This amazing research that just came out this week about, previously it was thought that Cudjoe Lewis was the last survivor of the Clotilda, the whole scenario that happened in Mobile. And there's this amazing article that comes out where they talk to this researcher, and, the researcher says that they found evidence that a woman that was on the Clotilda actually lived longer than Cudjoe Lewis. And the article it was just beautiful. It was like, yes, yes, yes. And then we get to the point where a quote says, the people of African descent in the United States that have West African roots cannot trace their, like literally someone who has done all this research on this enslaved woman who was alleged, on the alleged last slave ship, is perpetuating the myth we just said, that there is no paper trail back to West Africa. She just said it. That just happened this week, you guys. Major publications quoted this. Go ahead, Bernice.
Right. I'm listening to what you're saying, but one of the things that we have to do, we have to understand that we have an ancestral memory somewhere in there. And we have to follow our own gut and follow our own truth. Because if you're being told something by your family, you can't say, oh, that's not true. What you then say is, how do you know? And let's go on the journey to find it. You come up with your theories, you start looking. Because if somebody told me that my ancestors had no documentation, they are talking to the wrong person.
No, they talking to all the wrong
I am
ones.
a crazy researcher. I would tear down the
finish
courthouse.
line. We operate finish line. Okay.
Yeah.
Same thing, just like I talked about, you're handing off to the anchor leg and you keep running as they take the baton. We also finish like Usain Bolt. Does Usain Bolt stop right at the end of the finish line? No, he does not. He keeps running through. In fact, it's almost, most people probably think it's obnoxious.
Maybe they do.
But when you are that fast, it is extremely hard for you to stop yourself and not injure yourself if you stop too quickly. Is this a word? I think we getting a word tonight, right? You have to be a finish line genealogist, and not finish line as in stop where the line tells you to stop. But when you keep going and you allow yourself to downgrade progressively, you catch all that color, you catch all of that nuance, you catch all of those things that the average person is going to stop at when the hints stop showing up on the tree.
That's right.
Nika, I like what Ellen said. She said it takes work to write ancestors back into history. And that goes back to James' point about being a lazy scholar.
We have to keep laying the stones. We're reaching back. And I agree with Bernie said, it's a memory. It's in our DNA. And that's why I truly believe that we should be the ones to tell the stories, because nobody can get to that gut-wrenching agony and feeling of defeat, but rising up out of the ashes, telling our ancestors stories like we do, because they're just not going to get that. They're just not going to feel that. They're not going to know that. They can tell it probably from a scholarly view, but they're not going to get to the heart and the soul of our research the way we will.
Well, and
it's reflected.
And one thing, that's the thing. I think the people who were involved in the subject matter telling the stories is super impactful. But let me give you an example of people who tell stories that are not their own stories and still affect people every single day. I can guarantee you that everybody watching this program has had a educator in their lives, whether it is at the elementary level, middle school, high school, or college. Matter of fact, I'm seeing James presenting his book to one of his college mentors and how much that meant to him, right? There's clearly a story associated with that man, an experience, something that he was able to teach and impart in a certain way that resonated with James. And it may not have been his particular experience, but because he thought it valuable enough, or that it was warranted enough for him to teach it in a particular way that he did, right?
Yeah.
That's what left the impression. That's the way that's the way everybody should be approaching this. And you've gotta literally, I'm so serious. I want people to think about Usain Bolt finishing that race. That's how we really need to approach this. So and the chat room was saying, my middle school teacher, shout out your teacher. Who were they? Who was that? Think about, seriously, when you think about how you want to present this information, how you want to dispel the myths, how you want to bring your family into the fold, think about the most impactful educators that were in your life and how they taught you and how that seed was laid. And these don't even have to be licensed folks. This could be a grandparent or someone in your family who just thought the history was so important that how they shared it with you resonated so much. Can you bring the folks that you're telling the stories, can you put them at the seat at that table with that person again, even though they're not alive? That's how we should be thinking about this. Not I don't have no more hints, so I'm gonna close my tree out and I'm gonna wait till they get a new record set. That's not finished. That's not finish line.
No, it's not finish line. Not only that, but you got to stop looking always online. Right. Everything is not online, folks. You have to go to the place.
Mm-hmm. So
Go
here,
to a
so
place.
and since we talking about finish line genealogy,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about Black Confederates, because that's not finish line genealogy,
Mm-hmm.
right? The whole notion that the South actually allowed Black men to fight for them in large numbers. Let's talk about Black Confederates. It's quiet, it's quiet, it's quiet. Now, I'm not saying that Confederate soldiers didn't bring their enslaved with them as body servants and that they didn't serve in those capacities, right? You know, because I mean, what would it be? I'm a man of means. I have to bring my slave with me. I got to bring my Negro, right? To bring my water and to shine my shoes as I'm out on battle. Do you hear how ridiculous that sounds right now? Am I the only one react? Who brings their maid to the battlefield? Like, I mean, I know I'm looking at it from 21st century eyes. I know I am, but somebody just yes. Let's
But
let's let's talk
Nika,
about it.
Nika, I mean, you're talking about who brings their slave to the battlefield, but remember, these colleges, these Ivy League colleges and universities, what did they do? They brought
Yes.
their slaves
Yes.
to take
Yes.
care of them.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, we
Yes.
know that the documentation is there.
Yes. Yes. And that people are in the trap room like, what? Yes. And
Yes.
and men and women who were brought in terms of brought to service with their with their slaveholders, some of them did receive pensions. So you will see people of African descent who were enslaved who did receive Confederate pensions because they were injured during their slaveholder service. And so just as they, anyone else could get disability payments, right? Because remember, this is a time of where people had hard manual labor. You know what I mean? So if you got hit by shrapnel and it messed up your arm, right? You couldn't go back home and even after freedom and start working like that. You know what I mean? So yes, there are pensions, but that does not mean that they were out there shooting a gun. That's what I need, Lord Jesus. I need the people to understand, okay? Just because your slave owner, like, here's the thing, and I just said this weekend. If the Confederacy actually allowed Black men to serve, they still wouldn't have won because they would have went to the other side. Now you were gonna have a Candace Owens. There was gonna be some Candace Owens up there fighting, right? Some Omarosas. They gonna do what they gonna do. Omarosa used to be OC back in the day. Okay. That was her name back then. But this whole, oh Lord, this myth, just when I tell you, it really chaps my hide. It really
Uncle
does.
Steve.
Well, here's the thing about it. Again, let's go back to that word we used earlier, Nika, which is motivation, right?
Mhm.
What's the motivation behind perpetuating that myth? The motivation is to try to take the focus of the Civil War off of slavery and off the inhuman conditions which a lot of our families were subjected to, and also it's also designed to take away the emphasis on the fact that as much as the white Union officers and soldiers did in the early years of the Civil War, North was getting their behinds whooped in the Civil War before you start letting Black men and, believe it or not, Black women as well get on the battlefield. Okay, so no one wants to talk about that aspect. You hear people like Ulysses Grant and others being mentioned, but until fairly recently, you haven't heard much about the Black soldiers that went down and fought and freed their kinfolk.
Mm-hmm.
So you hear this thing about, oh, well, there were thousands of Black Confederates. Why? Because that's supposed to cancel out something.
Yeah, it is.
You
It's
know?
Yeah.
always a matter of canceling out, right? It can't. It
Mhm.
can't never. Oh Jesus. Okay, next one.
Further suppression.
Yes, because you want to distance yourself as much as you can from the acts of oppression, right? There's a
Right.
great piece that was just written by an NBA player talking about the difference between guilt and responsibility when it comes to things like that. Yes, there should not be guilt around what previous generations did, but if you were still profiting and benefiting from the system that they set up, you have a responsibility to end it. In this instance, we're talking about perpetuating the myth of Black Confederates. And yes, there are Black people that go out and do the reenactments because they want to be their ancestors, but we know damn well the men didn't have no gun. I just hear Kevin Cruz and Kevin Levin on Twitter. I just hear them going out. In fact, one of them has a book getting ready to come out about this. All right, next myth, the Indian princess. My grandmother had high cheekbones and long hair, and she was a princess of the Wakanda nation. How do I verify that her Wakandanness?
You know what, Nika? Can I jump in this for just one time, please?
Go ahead, Jane.
Go ahead, Jane. Go ahead.
Nika knows where I'm about to go with this.
Yeah.
If any of y'all ever seen the Boondocks, my favorite episode is the story of Catcher Freeman. And if you haven't seen it, I need you to go watch it.
I looked
on Hulu and I did not see it because I sure did try to watch it before this episode.
Let me tell y'all. If for those who haven't seen it, I'm going to summarize very quickly. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but the episode starts off with a story about the boys Huey and Riley, and it's talking about Catcher Freeman. He was this ninja warrior, runaway slave who was just chopping off white folks' heads and doing all type of stuff, kung fu moves, the whole bit, right? Swinging from trees and he was like a superhero, who could do no wrong. At one point in the show, this is my favorite part, the slave master tries to shoot him and he blocks a bullet with a shackle, right? And then it ends with he was a warrior, he was a fighter, and he was your great grandfather. Obviously this story is not true, right? And they go through that in the episode. I'm not going to say no Black person got a Native American princess somewhere in their background, but statistically speaking, how many Native American princesses were there, and were there enough to go around in our family trees? I just every other week.
Yeah, what you're talking about though, and this is what people I think failed to bring up in their narrative, that there was the European African mixture going on here. And rather than someone acknowledging, hey, my ancestor looks like that because of either rape or what have you, they're Native American. And they're failing to talk about what was really going on during that time.
You're absolutely right. And I think that I was being a little comedic with it, but you're right. And I think that goes into another area of when we talk about oral history and whatnot, which is how do we as families and communities, how do we remember trauma or traumatic events?
Child, there's a whole look. There are about 12 sermons going on tonight. We need to pass the collection plate because I think that's why a lot of this myth is perpetuated. And then the question I always have to bring it back to, if Angela was here, she'd be giving her little snaps. Are you sure you really want to be associated with that? You sure? Because if you are a freedman, it's almost like being Black twice. So the whole idea that, that there's this princess and there's people, all the prestige. In fact, it's so interesting. I talked to and met a cousin of mine on my Cherokee freedman line. And she was just talking about the trauma associated with being associated with a Native American nation. And once she discovered her lineage, how it was very hard for her to even read about the nation after that, after seeing how traumatized our ancestors were living in that environment. And so it's people automatically think because Native American groups have been so persecuted and oppressed in the United States that those same groups have not enacted those same things on African American people or formerly enslaved people themselves, that there weren't slave codes, that there weren't lynchings. All of the things that you see in the States, right, happened in especially in the 5 civilized tribes of Oklahoma. They happened there. I have people in my own family who I'm reading newspapers accounts about them being potentially lynched over a crime they didn't even commit. It took 5 years for the person to be found. And of course, that got way less ink than them allegedly perpetuating the crime. So this whole thought process that, um, that there was just this, that the welcoming often, oh, well, they welcomed. No, 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 it was not like that. I almost feel like I need to show people some of the documents. I've seen emancipations of enslaved people in the Cherokee Nation on one page, and on the other page, I've seen an inventory, and the only property that person had were 7 enslaved people. And I'm not talking about in Mississippi or Arkansas. I'm talking the Indian Territory, where everything's supposed to be nice and well, and we all live in harmony, and there are no slaves, which we know is not true. And if you watch this show long enough, you know it's not true. So be careful passing down the princess.
Nika, I'm as someone who doesn't have any freedman ancestry that I know of, I'm just still dwelling on the fact you said it's almost like being black twice. That was we got a must snap for that.
Yeah, because you deal with systemic oppression and race and racist systems just being in the United States. But then when you also have these additional forms of government and these additional systems on top of that are also racist, it is like being black twice. So even if, let's say, they won't let you go to the schools, they won't let you participate in elections, they won't allow you the opportunities to get things like strip payments and other stuff, just because visibly you are black. There are so many of us that have native blood, but we get discounted because our families were documented as freedmen. So that's why I always tell people, are you sure you want it? Because when you really find out about it, I don't think you want it.
And what about the people that are really African American, but you see, like I see a lot of my European matches, they discount, like it's right there in their face. I remember seeing it somewhere, and they had way more African American lineage than they did the NA, but they just didn't really want to believe that their ancestor was black instead of being native.
Why do you think that is? I mean,
I've seen that.
if I'm going to answer the question, I think because think about it. Why would you
Mhm.
want to be associated with a
Being black.
downtrodden?
Mhm.
I mean, the last podcast I had, this one of the speeches that I used that I edited in was where MLK was talking about the difference between how black was presented in the world and how white was presented in the world. And so why would you want to be associated with that? Because it's not been looked upon as positive until recently, until you can use certain things to get into college on it. Right? So that's the only way it's been seen as it's advantageous when it gets you benefits.
That's another myth there.
Yeah. But and yeah, Shelly talking about the Blackfoot. Lord, that's the one I always hear. We're 35 132nd Blackfoot. Family ain't nowhere near the Plain States to even claim that. That's usually the first thing I ask people is, where's your family live? That will pretty much dictate to you where your folks were. Goodness gracious. Another myth. If you can't get to the 1870 census, there's no hope to trace back further than that.
Use the lie.
I mean, why is that the perpetuated myth? James Aloysius Morgan III. Why is that?
Again, lazy scholarship. Lazy. Because while the census is good, it's great. It might be a good some good bones to have, but you got to put meat on it. Okay, you have to understand the history of the township, the city, the county where your people are living. What you want to make sure that you're doing is you want to look at probate records. There's so many things that you can find outside of just census records. Okay, so the very thought that well I can't find this person on this census record. I mean, you might not find them today. I mean, how do you know that was their name? How do you know they lived in this particular place? There's so many variables that occur. I mean, I'll use myself as an example. If you're looking for, I'm from New Jersey, born and raised. Most people know this already. If you're looking for me in the was it 2010 census, I believe. If you're looking for me in New Jersey in the 2010 census, you ain't gonna find me there. You know why? I was in college at Howard in Washington D.C. when the last census was taken. That doesn't mean I died. It means I went to college. It means I moved. You know. So you might see my mother, you see my brother, but you're not gonna see me because I lived my life. You see, and that's something that we sometimes what we do is we put these ancestors. It's like they're in this little box on the census record or on this particular document, and that's their whole existence right there in that one little box.
They won't even search the whole census record. They're looking on that one page.
Thank you. Thank you.
Finish line research. That's the theme of the night. And here's the thing, right? People often neglect the other records that we have available to us, which is another reason why I think folks get so short-sighted about, well, if you can't find someone on 1870, you can't trace back further. No, that's not true. What if the census taker didn't come to your neighborhood? What if your family wasn't home? That doesn't mean that they aren't in deeds or they aren't in the newspaper or they aren't in the Freedmen's Bureau. I mean, we literally can list off all of the different types of record sets that they could be in that are outside of the census, voter registration, right? I mean, gosh, you could just keep going on and on. This is 82 episodes of this show. If you've been watching us long enough, you can list off all the documents you can find somebody in that are not a census. And if not, you should be able to.
Nika. Here's a question. What if I decided not to actually answer the door when the census man came around?
Well, especially if it was an unknown white man you didn't know.
Thank you.
And keep in mind, they may not have even gone to the house, but stood at the corner and asked somebody else who's in the house and give them the wrong last name.
What you said.
Okay.
Or what if your family chose one name at one point and then decided to go buy another one later?
That's right.
Maybe that's why you couldn't find them. Definitely Civil War pension files, absolute gold, poll tax records, educable children's list. I mean, we can go on and on and on about documents you can find that will predate or be better, add more color, give you more information than a stinking census. Right? Next lie from the pit of genealogy hell. The slaveholder was the father of all the biracial people he enslaved.
False.
False.
Ooh-wee. Even I knew that one.
Yeah. I mean, could be the overseer.
That's
what you said.
Trust me, I know all the Ivy's overseers on them census just to double check. Yeah. I've researched them too. Trust me, they right here.
Could be the master's friends.
Well, and Lord,
They could have been loaned out.
Yeah.
Somebody could have got loaned out.
what you said, Yvette said he had Viagra. That's how it happened. Girl, they was cooking up some kind of root in one of them little shacks, child. Lord, I have to believe they had it before, right? Come on, our folks are medicinal. They didn't come from Africa, stupid. So it's possible. It's possible. But that's the thing is, you know, and the reason why people are like, who makes these up? Who creates this? That's not, you guys, seriously. If you see a slave that's listed as mulatto, the first reaction most people are going to have is, was the slave owner the father? Like, literally, I mean, I know I'm not crazy. I've seen people react this way when they're looking at documents. So I don't think that's far-fetched. Just because you own an enslaved person who's biracial doesn't necessarily mean that you are a relative of them, or if you are the parent of said person. You could be a relative, it could be the overseer, right? It could be a lot of different stuff. But you can't assume, you can't assume this particular owner that you're finding the enslaved people with is the father or is a relative.
Yep.
Yeah.
But you know
the
something?
slave owner's son.
Yep. But and here's the other thing. Do you think that the media, in terms of the movies and TV shows and things that we are consuming, also plays into these myths and whatnot that we're talking about tonight because of how they depict slavery and whatnot? It's very when I think about something like Queen, like Alex Haley's Queen, for just as an example. I don't want to be disrespectful, but the romanticized image of, you know, the master with the big house went and got him a slave girl, and now you've got this, you know, and pardon the language, but you got this stereotype of the tragic mulatto who is supposed to be the heir of the estate to some, or the heir to this lineage of these rich white people, right? That may have happened. I'm sure it did happen in many cases, but nobody wants to talk about, well, the father was really the overseer, and this person was really like 1.5 steps above a slave on a good day. You know, nobody wants to tell that story in their family tree. They want, even some of us today, we want to say, well, we're descended from the master with the big house, not this other guy, or a woman for that matter. Right.
We got a couple more. There were no free blacks in the South.
Oh.
False.
Clearly,
Really? That's all you have to
clearly
do is go to New Orleans,
go to New Orleans, go to Mobile,
go to Charleston.
I just got done reading a whole book on the history of black barbers in slavery and freedom. And I'm sitting there reading about black barbers in Natchez, Mississippi in the 1830s and 40s that were free men, okay, with their families. It wasn't like there was just one or two of them, you know. So
yeah, there were the bustling free people of color community in Natchez, pretty much since it started. But yeah, but then that goes back to, you know, it's so funny to me how you can peddle the lost cause and how it wasn't about slavery, but then you don't acknowledge that there were free people there. If it's not really about slavery. That's really interesting. Last one, and I sort of alluded to this earlier. Only the descendants of folks in the Clotilda can trace back to their West African roots. Why is that a myth?
You can name other people that can do that.
We've had them on our
show. We can make some phone calls pretty quickly.
No, we've had them on our show.
Yes, absolutely. No, I'm saying we can call them right now and get them on the show again. Is what I'm saying.
No, phone call. That's just a phone call away. But that completely. The other thing that quote does is it completely diminishes the use of DNA and genealogy to trace back to whatever country's origins. If they're African, if they're somewhere else. But that it's very dismissive of technology and it's lazy scholarship. So again, finish line genealogy. Finish the line. All right. Moving forward, we're going to go into viewer comments, which we've had some really great ones during this discussion tonight. Shannon Christmas says, far too many genealogy resources focus on slave schedules where the names of the enslaved rarely appear. These people overlook all the documents where the enslaved are named. Come on now, snap all day, Shannon, what you said. Reese said, if you're telling a destitute person they can get a check, they're going to sign up. That's right. Talking about the Black Confederates. You're right. If they don't have food, they don't have resources, they're going to go where they got the money. Karen Royal says, some of us have Irish ancestry. So I say, look at those indentured servants who also work those fields. Yes. That is a very good one. That is a very good one. Absolutely. And Tyrone Craft chimes in just now. These myths are perpetuated to convince people not to look in the first place.
Exactly.
Yes.
Stay away. You can't handle the information, or it's wrong, or it's not right. You know, also bringing in that, well, we know what's legitimate. That's a whole show right there.
That's
we know what legit. We know
they
what
question your research skills.
And here you are, Usain Bolt.
Question your documentation
when you Usain Bolting it.
I hear you.
We both just sat back, but it's true.
We are running that race though, and we're showing you the receipts every week.
And then here's the thing: it goes back to what I said earlier. All these black folk walking around America and other countries in the Western Hemisphere today, we didn't just fall out the sky. As handsome and beautiful as we all are, we didn't just fall out the sky. So this DNA. I mean, can someone please explain this 17% European DNA I got?
Can you explain the 25% I got?
See what I'm saying?
The 19% I got.
That's what I'm saying. Somebody, and I think I just said this. Somebody had to create all of this.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
right? So the whole idea that everybody just fell out the sky like Bruce Almighty or something, we don't no, that's not how this works. Like not at all. So yeah, this is
And
just
if it was and if it was like that, please tell me what date it was when all these black folk just started raining all across
I mean,
America.
you know what? That's a
Please.
great question. Was it like the night the stars fell? You know, when the
Right.
In
slaves recounted?
Alabama,
So
hush.
Right. We just fell out from the sky and we just started picking cotton. That's what happened.
and we already knew what to do. It's
Right.
almost like when it's so funny when my son watches these like Jonas Brothers kind of like
Mhm.
movies on just Disney stuff, right?
Mhm.
Like Camp Rock or one of these movies,
Mhm.
right? When I'm like, how do all these kids come to this camp and they already know the choreography? Like that's what it's
Well,
like. How do they know?
right.
How do they know to hit this on 1, 2, 3, 4? Right?
Mhm.
Like they had to practice at home. So literally that's the way that people act about African American history. It's like we're in Camp Rock or we're in a
Mhm.
Disney movie and we all know the choreography and we all have the lines, we say the right thing, and it
Right.
wraps all nice up in a bow, and there's a performance at the end and we have jazz hands. That literally is what people think about slavery. It's just horrible. Absolutely horrible. Oh my gosh. All right, so we're going to move on to your favorite segment of the entire show, Ask Mariah. This is the part where you, the viewer, submit your questions, queries, conundrums, and more to the panel. And we weigh in live with research help specifically geared towards you. Panelists never see the queries beforehand, so you get a chance to see us work together live to help our Genia buds get past their brick walls. All right, tonight, Ask Mariah is from Miss Ashley Peterson. She says, is my great grandmother listed in any of the 1930 federal census records? So she wants to find great grandmother in 1930 census. What she knows is that Frances Lee Bell was born in October 1914 to Josephine Thomas Bell and John Bell in Orangeburg County, South Carolina. Frances gave birth to Lily Mae King, her maternal grandmother, on April 3rd, 1930. At the time of her grandmother's birth, the census data was being compiled in Orangeburg County and its neighboring Calhoun County, another area that her family has ties to. Frances was not recorded as living with either of her parents, who are no longer together by 1930. Lily Mae's alleged father, Samuel King, is living with his parents, Alfred King and Roxana Wright, on April 7th, 1930. Frances Lee passed away in 2004. So she is trying to find Grandma Frances, who was born on April 3rd, 1930. She's trying to find her on the census. She's looked at both grandparents, great grandparents, does not see her in either household. Why is that? Why is she not on the census schedule, even though technically she was alive at the time? Going forward, she has gone through the 1930 census records page by page for both Orangeburg and Calhoun counties looking for Frances, with the idea that an indexer may have misspelled her name. She's also visited the Orangeburg County Library and Historical Society, where she searched for records outside of the typical census record, searched through written family history write-ups that the Historical Society maintains. No such luck. What she does have in her possession are 1920 census, 1940 census, the death certificate for Frances and Sam's son, dated 1937, and two phone directories listing Frances, dated 1956 and 1958, and she has taken an ancestry DNA test. So how do we find Grandma Frances, born April 3rd, 1930? Can't find her on the 1930 census.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Has she found Grandma Frances' mother?
Yes, she
Okay.
did find her. And she was not recorded. Frances was not recorded with either of her parents. Her parents were enumerated,
Mm-hmm.
but Frances herself was not.
Okay. Are the parents still alive in 1930?
Yes, because Frances was just born. Frances
Okay.
was
So,
born on April 3rd of 1930.
Mhm.
okay.
And or actually no, I'm sorry. Lily
1940.
Mae, Lily
Okay.
Mae, the grandmother was born on April 3rd of 1930.
Mm-hmm.
And her father was living with his parents and is enumerated on April 7th, 1930. Frances was not the mother of Lily Mae was not recorded as living with either parents.
Okay. You know what I'm thinking of? Has she looked at that whole census?
She
I
went,
mean,
she did, she
up and
went the
down,
whole thing.
back.
I think the child was with the midwife still.
I don't know about being with the midwife. She could be.
As a
Or with
family
There
another
could
member.
be
family member.
another name.
Yeah. I
Or
think, because think about it. If her Frances not recording is living with either of her parents who are no longer together by 1930. So Frances is the mother of Lily Mae. And she's not recorded with either of her parents who are no longer together by 1930. But Lily Mae's father is living with his parents, and they and they're documented on April 7th, 1930. So I'm thinking,
the child is
Did they
with somebody. She's with a
did they
neighbor or she's with somebody
did she
in
mhm.
narrow
that
down that
community.
yeah, did she narrow down that just the name, her first name instead of
The last
the
name.
last name for all
Yeah.
the women that are around that age, that were born?
Well, and then here's the question too.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't this census one of the ones that is it as of April 1st? Right? Because certain
Oh.
censuses, the information is as of June 1st or April 1st, right? Is this one of those censuses? Because if it is, you can't expect to find Lily Mae on it if that's not the case,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me go and look. I'm gonna pull up a blank 1930. I think that one's April 1st. I'm pretty sure it is. People are saying
But she
that
said she was born
yeah,
April
that she
3rd.
maybe needs to look for nicknames like Fanny.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that would be something to consider. To me, it sort of sound like she fine tooth combed the two counties, neighboring counties. Um, the only other thing I could think of is at that point, if somebody was an unwed mother, sometimes they sent them away to have the child.
True.
Yeah. She could look and
Well,
look for a different surname.
yeah, I was,
Yeah.
I was about to
You
say with the
know,
surname piece.
yeah, and she could have easily had a different surname if she was living with an aunt or somebody else.
Because I have seen when they were born that close to the census, they'll say no name or babe, or I've seen Mose a lot for my family. I don't know why they kept using MOSE for like babies that were under a year old when that
I
wasn't
agree.
even really their natural name. So
And I
And,
agree with Bernice about looking under a different surname because I've had relatives to show up that late in the census living next door with a relative under their last name.
um,
mhm.
by
and and
accident.
and also if you got an unwed mother, I mean, there's a chance that somebody may have actually put her on the census with her father's last name, or or another
Yeah.
Yeah.
family surname, like everybody's saying. So,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Official census date is April 1st, 1930.
Okay, so she.
So technically Lily Mae should be on there, but something is telling me, I mean, think about it. They come to your house, Lily Mae, Frances in the back room laid up, and she's not usually there. I mean, I think also argues a point of not being so hung up on the census at this
mhm.
point. Yes, it's nice to have. We want to see her. We want to be, we want to be thorough, but this is where you're going to have to allow, anyone who knew Lily can attest to the fact that she lives alive. You're here.
Mhm.
So, I think this is and the other thing is, as a newborn child, what is that line going to tell you
Mhm.
other
Yeah.
than birth state for her and both parents? But if you already have the names of both parents and you've tracked the dad and you have him listed down, but you're not finding Francis and you're not finding Willie Mae, well, if you got Francis in 1920, you've already got her information for her birthplace and the birthplace of her parents. So, you know what I'm saying? If you've got the dad and you've got the mom separately from her, then you kind of have that information. That census is almost in some ways could potentially be inconsequential.
But
Right.
you never know. But you never know. She could have been like the world's first infant fighter pilot or something. You never know.
Yeah.
It
But
could
I
be
would look for a
could
birth
find something.
certificate. She's in South Carolina, so there should be a birth certificate
Hmm.
or a delayed birth certificate. But there's certainly other places to look in addition to the census. That's only one document.
Yeah.
As late as she died, check the Social Security application to see. Well, you're talking about an infant, right?
Yeah, I think for her, she just
She was
wants to
focused on
know
that
if the grade.
year,
Yeah,
right?
she just wants to
Okay.
know. She's
What
like,
was going on? And,
yeah, her question is her great grandmother, is Frances listed on 1930? And I think
Okay.
there's a possibility that she isn't, and I think there's a possibility that she is. But if she, let's say the family member that gave birth to helped her give birth to Lily Mae is a midwife. She's at their house. She's not typically there, right? If they're coming by the baby daddy house on the 7th, and we know that Lily was born on the 3rd, that's 4 days later. I don't think she's up out chopping cotton or doing anything at that point.
Right.
She's recuperating. So,
Mhm.
Right.
so she might be, if you go on page by page, here's the thing. Have you looked for just Francis's or Fanny's or Lily's or Lil or anything you can do a wild card search on? And I think too, there's a possibility that you just have to be comfortable with you don't find them in 1930.
Right.
Mhm.
Did she find him in 1940?
Let me go forward. One moment, please. Yes, she did find 1920 census, 1940
So
census.
she was 10 years old in the 1940 census.
Yeah, and then
And who is she with?
yeah, that's what I was about to say. That would be used to verify her birth.
Yeah, right.
And yeah, the only thing you're
Yeah.
not getting are parents' things. And she also has a death certificate for the parents' their son too.
in 1937. You're talking about him.
1937. So
Okay.
she's got the supporting documents, but I think that's
Right.
the thing. This is kind of going back to the point that we were making earlier about don't get so hung up on having census records. You've got a lot of great data already that you're working with that you've been able to use and make
That
inference
can
on
confirm.
that confirm things for you that would be on that one particular line or two lines of the census. So don't get so hung up on having the census that that you miss the fact that you've done the due diligence. So we have to give her kudos for trying to for going local, for searching out other things outside of the census versus I just can't find her there. So we
Right.
definitely have to say that. Chat room is saying many infants and young ones often don't get listed. That is definitely true. Look in the homes of collateral relatives. Someone else could have had the baby for a bit. That was what I thought as well. Look at accounts that can tell you about the conditions for childbirth at the time. I think that's a good suggestion. And yeah, I think they found her in 1940s. She's a let's see, maybe wasn't born in the county. Search the fan club or look for your crew. Someone mentions newspaper birth announcements for Black folks, Negro news, unless it's a Black paper. Maybe. Um, yeah, and she's already worked city directories a couple times. So I think you're doing well. I just think that
I know that was a
I
lot.
think I think you're a finish line researcher
Mhm.
because you still want that extra
She
piece.
was squeezing the juice out of it.
Squeezing the juice out. Baptismal records, church records, right?
Right.
Look at the church, see when the baby was baptized.
And what was going on there, at the time? You never know. You just don't never know. Because I
Yeah,
just had his birth certificate, and he was born in 1918, but he had the midwife's name was on there. Now I'm like trying to find out who was Liza Hooks in Midway doing that. It's,
mhm.
so that's another clue, but yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to make sure that she knows, you're doing it right.
Yep.
Mhm.
Just to give her that vote of confidence, because I think sometimes, some people think, well, I'm not doing this right if I can't find a person in every single census. And that's not, raise your hand on the panel if you found every single relative or ancestor of yours on every single census.
No, but it still bugs me.
It does. It does
Mhm.
because you're finish line.
But I
So
find
Yep.
something to put in that spot to make up for that year, whether it's a newspaper just to keep the timeline flowing. But yeah, we all have that little
yeah.
check mark there where, oh, it's missing.
Well, if you have a genealogy brick wall, want help scaling that wall, submit your query for Ask Mariah. Be sure to be as detailed as possible with your submission, and be sure to do that so that the research efforts aren't duplicated. Cross your fingers, press submit, and you just may be selected for one of our future episodes. Current events tonight. Whew, we talked about the slaves. Child, child, child. Yes, we
This
did.
came right on
Oh, this
time.
was right on time in the nation. As America's racist historical myths go, the loyal black slave is one of the most enduring, destructive, and tightly held. Emerging from the white Southern racial imagination in the 1830s, a faithful slave personified slave owners' defensiveness against a growing abolitionist movement and its condemnations of slavery and slaveholders. As evil and immoral, the loyal slave trope insisted that enslaved blacks labored for their enslavers, not out of self preservation and uh, deeply instilled fear, but as an expression of love, fidelity, and devotion. Yes, I had to read it like that. After the Civil War ended in their humiliating defeat, white Southerners attempted to retroactively justify the Confederacy with the quote lost cause ideology, an ahistorical narrative that further reimagined the Old South as filled with happy enslaved blacks. The loyal slave became a stock character in slavery apologia, from Gone with the Wind to pancake mix ad campaigns to, perhaps less famously, a little known subgenre of Confederate monuments. Nearly all of those overtly racist memorials still stand in sites around the South. As with Confederate monuments generally, loyal slave markers communicated not only with the white the white South's nostalgia for a counterfeit version of what once was, but also its belief in what should have been, constructed not during slavery, but between the 1900s and 1930s, like nearly all Confederate monuments. Loyal slave markers served as a visible component of an anti Black backlash against Black civil rights gains. In the face of African American empowerment struggles, loyal slave monuments telegraphed the idea that slavery had been the natural state of things. Faithful slave markers also warned Black folks working to overturn the racial caste system in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that they risked the same brutal violence that had kept racial order during slavery. In fact, Black defiance had manifested in 250 slave uprisings, more than 100,000 escapes via the Underground Railroad, and thousands more escaped slaves joining the Union Army before slavery was abolished in 1865. I love how they threw in all those facts. Like Black folks didn't just lay down and take it, because we sure did not. All right, moving forward, a woman abducted from Africa as a child has been identified as the last known survivor of the slave ships that took kidnapped West Africans to the United States. Hannah Durkin, a lecturer at Newcastle University in the UK, was carrying out other research when she came across multiple sources that mentioned a woman called Radoshi, the university said in a press release. Durkin pieced together Radoshi's life story through a number of archival sources, starting with her kidnapping in what is now Benin at the age of 12, and her passage to Mobile, Alabama aboard the Clotilda, the last slave ship to arrive in the U.S. in 1860, carrying 116 people. During her research, Durkin discovered that Radoshi was forced to marry on board the ship. She and her husband, known as William or Billy, were brought by Washington Smith, a founder of the Bank of Selma and owner of the Bo Cheeto plantation in Alabama, where she was enslaved and renamed Sally Smith, working in the house and the fields for almost 5 years. After emancipation in 1865, she continued to live on the Smith plantation and came into contact with early civil rights activists such as Amelia Boynton Robinson. Her life was documented by Boynton Robinson as well as other activists and historians, and Durkin drew from their work. Radoshi died in Alabama in 1937, 2 years after Olalale Kosola, or Cudjo Lewis, who was previously thought to have been the last survivor of the slave trade. And just for measure, I have been to the point of no return in Ouidah in Benin, and it's one of the most amazingly beautiful and haunting things ever. Yeah, amazing journey. Amazing
Mm.
journey. All right. The Restore the Ancestors Project is a community effort to index records of interest for African American genealogy with a special focus on burned counties and special focus on burned counties in the former slaveholding Southeast states. Please join us in making records of African American ancestors free and searchable by indexing. The first set of records are early Colleton County, South Carolina marriage records. Make a commitment to index one batch or more of just 10 records. Project coordinators are BlackProGen Live panelists Angela Walton Raji and Tony Carrier, along with Elena Thebnet, Robin Renee Foster, William Durant, and Candace Turpin. Organizational sponsors are the Center for Family History at the International African American Museum, yours truly here at BlackProGen Live, and Family Search. We will cherish your contributions. Register today at the link in the chat and begin indexing records today. And I believe over 1,000 of them have already been indexed since the project launched last week. So great job, all of you. Here's your pep talk to keep it up. Have you checked out all the topics we're going to be talking about during season 5? Head to whoisnikasmith.com for a downloadable schedule, and don't forget to set your reminders. Also, be sure to tune in to the long-running Research at the National Archives and Beyond, hosted by BlackProGen Live panelist Bernice Bennett. And also check out the African Roots podcast, hosted by BlackProGen Live panelist Angela Walton Raji. And boy, the next time you're going to see us, it's going to be a doozy of an episode. I suggest you get the wine, whatever you got to do before we start talking about what we're going to talk about next time. What are we talking about? Well, in 2018, the Equal Justice Initiative opened the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which memorializes more than 4,400 African-American men, women, and children who were hanged, burned alive, shot, drowned, and beaten to death by white mobs between 1877 and 1950. Episodes 83A and B, we actually had to break it into 2 because we found that much information, will feature the family history of some of the victims documented in the memorial in an effort to humanize and bring light to their lives outside of the tragic event they have been associated with. You don't want to miss this. Join us live on Tuesday, April 23rd at 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern for stories from the National Memorial for Peace and Justice Part 1. And then join us again the following week, Tuesday, April 30th at 6 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. for stories from the National Memorial for Peace and Justice Part 2. All right, True, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on for your salutation.
All righty, thank you for paying the bills. So we just want to thank you all for coming out tonight. We had such a great audience participation. We just enjoy all your comments and everything. I know on the 23rd and the 30th is going to be really emotional, and we're going to govern ourselves accordingly. But we're going to celebrate these the people that were picked for this project. We're going to celebrate their lives, and we just want you all to come back out and join us with that. It will be a little bit somber, but we're going to lift each other up through this. So we'll see you then. Thanks for coming out. Good night, you all.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen.
Hello, everybody out there.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen Live.
The unapologetic Black and people of color viewpoint.
It's a place where evidence tells the stories.